All right, I think we are live. Okay, yes, we are live. Hey everyone, welcome to the session. Thanks for coming in. Happy Sunday. As with every Sunday, I'm just so honored to be with you in this time of sensitivity and still continuing uncertainty. And welcome to our Sacred Space session, and I look forward to sharing time with you in our Sacred Space session together today. So today, let me just make sure the Facebook side is working. Okay, we seem to be working over there. Hello, everyone. Today, what we're going to do is we will set sacred space, and then our topic for today will be the sacred masculine, the inner masculine, and the power of initiation. So I'll make a few comments on that. I'll try to keep that a little bit on the shorter side, because then in order to sort of more fully illustrate some of the dynamics of inner masculine and also the dynamics of initiation of one specific part of the life cycle that we want to talk about today, Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, will get on screen and lead us through a story that she brilliantly has selected for this session. And then we'll have a discussion around that, and then we'll close Sacred Space. So with that, I'll get started, and I'll go ahead and open Sacred Space. So to open Sacred Space, I'll say that the space that we're about to open is a space devoid of fear, threat, and control, intended by all of us for us to be able to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we choose to take that guidance. A safe sanctuary space for us all to relax and surrender with no danger or threat, so that we can partake of the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that comes from being in sacred space together as a group. And as I open Sacred Space today, I will propose that we all follow the 4 principles of proceeding in sacred space. The first is confidentiality. What happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. And the way we do that, since this is online and it's the internet, instead of when you ask a question, when you make a comment, if you would like to maintain confidentiality, you would just anonymize your profile. You would go into the Crowdcast and change your username to Mickey Mouse or Harry Potter, and that's how we will maintain confidentiality, even though we're online. So that's number 1. Number 2 is no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no tough love. When we're here together in sacred space, we are holding space for each other to be as we are, with no intervention, no attempts at improvement or anything else. We hold space for each other to be afraid, to be anxious, to be happy and relaxed, to feel perhaps guilty about that, and then to be okay with that and to hold space for that. There is a time and a place for intervention and tough love and all of that, but because those are in the precincts of control, right, and threat, right? I'm recommending this book to you, so if you don't read it, you're kind of a dunderhead, right? There's nothing wrong with that, but that is of the precinct of the profane, which isn't bad. It's just a different kind of space. And most of our time in the world is profane. It's just the era of human history we're in. So that in this hour or 2 every week, we're kind of setting aside, making a boundary and saying, yeah, there's nothing wrong with doing that, but that's not what we're going to do in this sort of sacred hour or 2. So the third principle, which is a corollary to the first 2, is no commerce. So in the sacred space, nothing may be sold or recommended or suggested. We are here for your energy. Not for the things you bring or recommend or things that may be helpful, right? In other words, we're here for what you are, not for what you do or provide, not for the function, not for the benefit you bring. We're here for you yourself, as an end in and of yourself. So no commerce, no recommendations. And then the fourth is also a corollary. There's no expectation of participation. So there's no pressure to do anything. There's no fear, threat, or control to stay in sacred space, to leave sacred space, to speak up and raise your hand, to comment, to not comment. There's no pressure at all. Again, because the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention. Again, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. And all of us together will tend to amplify that. So this is what I will propose. And if you are not okay with it, we will give you a moment now to withdraw from the and we'll just catch up with you later in profane space. We'll still hang out, no worries at all. In other words, there's no fear, threat, or control about you need to stay in the sacred space because it's good for you. And we're in the middle of a pandemic, and don't you know what's good for you? There's none of that. You come and go as you please, with no worries at all. Okay. So if you're not okay with entering this space now, go ahead and withdraw from the session, and we'll catch up with you later. Okay. And for now, with the rest of us, we will move forward together into sacred space. And now as we enter sacred space together, I will sort of declare the 4 principles of confidentiality, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no expectation of participation. Happy Sunday. Happy Sunday, and welcome. Okay, so the topic I just wanted to touch on today is the sacred masculine and the power of initiation. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And so to introduce this, I'll say that a couple sessions ago, we talked about the sacred feminine, the inner feminine, right? And the role and function of the inner feminine in the world at large, and then also in an individual person, right? We say time and time again, regardless of your outer gender, right? We all as human beings have an inner masculine and an inner feminine within us. And we can call it by many names, but there are these 2 principles within all of us. And then after that session, we spent another session talking about a special case of the sacred feminine, whom we call the muse, in the form we talked about in terms of the muse. And that was a great session in and of itself. Now today, we will switch over to the other side and talk about the sacred masculine and some of the mythopoetics around that. And we will have a lovely myth that Gary has selected and will take us through as well. And so as we dive into the inner masculine, the masculine principle, I want to do a quick recap on what it is we talk about when we talk about inner masculine and inner feminine. Those of you who do healing stuff with me, bliss stuff with me, you can take a break, go get a cup of coffee or something. You've heard this a million times. You're probably sick of it. But basically, we have in us these 2 principles that seem like they are opposing or sort of diametrically opposite of each other, right? Left, dark. We can call it masculine or feminine. We can call it yin, yang, soft, hard, light, dark. And they are opposites, but also they are 2 sides of the same coin. And what they desire, principally what these life forces of masculine and feminine within us desire is to finally, over the course of a lifetime, come together in full union, reintegration, and reconciliation in harmony. Okay. And I've said this a million times, but this is a public forum, so I'll say it again. I've tried in my work to call them, terms like yin or yang, right? That are more sort of politically correct and comfortable for me because of, gender issues and the fact that we live in a patriarchy. But basically, when I then do my work with advisees, and especially we go into dream work, when you're in a dream, the yang element shows up as a guy, right? You're a stupid boss. And we can do the sort of transformation. It's just a little bit of too much work all the time. So shorthand, we just call them inner masculine and inner feminine within each of us, regardless of external gender. But you can call them, anything you want. It's just, we talk about this stuff so much, we just kind of roll with it. And when we talked about the roles of inner feminine and inner masculine, we had said that, yes, inner feminine is soft and nurturing and receptive and sensitive and all of the stuff that we tend to emphasize in a patriarchy. But the thing you don't hear as much about is that with the inner feminine, the core power of the inner feminine is that she is the holder of vision. Vision comes from the inner feminine, which means at the end of the day, she is, if you have a feminine principle within you, that feminine principle is basically the boss of everything. And that's uncomfortable to admit in a patriarchy, and we tend to sort of stuff that down. Okay, so the core power of the feminine, the inner feminine, and the outer feminine, for that matter, is the visionary function. Inner masculine, or the yang function within us, right, is strong and assertive and capable and competent, et cetera, et cetera. But the function of all that power, right, is not to hold the feminine on a leash or contain her or hold her back and keep her in line or anything. No. It's for boundary control and protection, right? It's a protective aspect. It's not an aggressive aspect. Ideally, when it's wounded and misfunctioning, it will become aggressive, right? Obviously, but then once the boundaries are maintained, we get the download of vision from the feminine. And then the job of the inner masculine beyond that is to, where necessary, extend outward beyond boundary, right, to get resources to sort of express the vision of the inner feminine. The fancy word is manifestation, right? So the function of the inner masculine, the masculine function, is protection and manifestation. So you have vision and then protection and manifestation. In corporate terms, I know it's a sensitive thing to talk about these days, but just in all the stories we hear about, like, visionary companies like Apple, and it is sort of like the inner feminine is the visionary CEO, right, and then the inner masculine is the implementing COO. So technically, I mean, they're basically equal, but the job of the CEO is to get vision. And whether she or he can actually sort of execute that, it's hard to do both, right, at the same time. So typically you divide labor and say, okay, you just go up the mountain, figure out what we're supposed to do, keep yourself clear, and then we'll protect you, right? That's the whole point of boundary control. We'll protect you while you do that, so you don't need to worry about defending yourself, right? So strong boundaries are necessary so that the deep space radar dish, right, antenna dish, can open without fear of being, like, messed with, and then they receive the signal and then issue out the orders to the implementation team that goes ahead and does it. That's a sort of very crude, general, rough cut way of thinking about it. And so for all of us as humans, for every society, for every organization, but for each individual human being, regardless of gender, we have both of these sort of functions within us. We have an inner masculine function and an inner feminine function. We have the function of nurturing, receptivity, and the visionary function. And then we also have the boundary protection and manifestation function, right? So I, as I happen to be a man, right? But I have a strong inner feminine sort of visionary function, and I have a strong inner masculine sort of boundary protection and manifestation function, and that's everybody needs both. Everybody needs both. Now, in different cases, when inner masculine or inner feminine, or in some cases both, is suppressed in a person, regardless of gender, it is a key sort of determinant of what their persona will look like, right? What their pattern of wounding will look like. You may have a wound from childhood that suppressed your inner masculine or inner feminine. And then when two people come together in a relationship, they both bring their fingerprint of wounds of how their inner masculine and inner feminines have been suppressed. It's not the only dimension, but it's a major one. And those wound patterns will reflect in the other person and then interact. All the drama of relationships, kind of the spaghetti tangle, just kind of issues out from that as a result of that alchemical combination. And this is regardless of whether the couple is a same-sex couple, a hetero couple, et cetera, et cetera. It's like, even if it's two men or two women in a relationship, they each come to the table with an inner masculine and inner feminine, or yin and yang, call it what you will, right? But these two principles, and they will interact, right? They will interact. When you read dreams, one of the ways you figure out what is going on with my inner masculine and inner feminine is that the quote unquote masculine or feminines show up. They do stuff in dreams. We'll see this later in the myth that Gary will tell us. Watching the feminine figures, watching the masculine figures and what they're doing, and who is doing what to whom, and then you get a sort of a coded kind of MRI X-ray of like what the heck is actually going on inside of you, and then you know that your outer world will often reflect what's going on within you, and then you kind of take your cues from that. So anyway, in a healthy, full power person, you need both inner masculine and inner feminine, vision and power. If you lose your inner feminine, you lack vision. You're busy doing all the things, busy all the time, fighting fires, helping other people, but there's no vision. There's no higher plan, right? If you lose your inner masculine, you have no protection and no manifestation. You're an idle dreamer. You have great vision, but you have no capability to either protect yourself, to say no to people who want you to, like, co-opt you to go help them with their visions. You have no ability to say no. You're a people pleaser. People walk all over you. You're this innocent sort of victim of circumstance, and you have no capability. You can't implement yourself out of a paper bag. These are the extreme cases. I'm just coloring them in extremes so you can see the texture. So that's at the individual level. And at a societal level, I mean, any of these topics, we can go down 4 hours, right? I'm just kind of skimming the treetops here. At a societal level, we live in a patriarchy. So the feminine categorically is suppressed. And what you would expect from that kind of a situation is where there's a lot of masculine power, there's a lot of capability, we're doing lots of stuff, we're consuming a lot of stuff, but there's no higher vision. Right? And when we say our society is like 99% profane, 1% sacred, that's what we mean. It's 99% the power of implementation and 1% the vision of like what we should actually want ideally to be doing with it. There's no vision in our world. Tons of power, material capability, the ability to blow up the whole planet with a push of a couple buttons, and absolutely no conception, higher vision of what to do with it. No vision, no moral compass. Everything's about the rules that have been passed down from the past, not even the values that they embody, right? The sort of letter of the law, not the spirit. And then even the letter is bendable and nobody says anything, right? Nothing is sacred. Everything is negotiable. Everything has a price. Everything is up for sale and can literally be profaned. And as a result, right, it is exhausting for anybody to live like this, which is why we are like anxious and depressed at the same time. It's like, how can you be anxious and depressed at the same time, and exhausted as a result? The reason one can be anxious and depressed at the same time is precisely because you have no vision, or you have no idea where we're going or why. So we're worried about that. So we're stressed at the fact that we're constantly moving and we have no idea what direction is the right one. And then you do that for a while, and then you get depressed because you don't have that direction. So at the societal level and even at the individual level, we have this basic loss of the inner feminine of vision. The natural question is, how do we solve that? How do we heal that? That is a huge question. It's a question I personally spend a lot of time thinking about. But at a high level, right, the restoration, the answer for me is the restoration of the sacred, i.e. the feminine, basically, in men and women alike, Once you restore the feminine and restore vision, then the masculine is also healed, because all the capability he has is then put into context. He knows what he's supposed to be doing with all the power and armament and muscles and capability and ability to boundary protect. Without the feminine, he's just a berserker. He's just going around like killing stuff randomly for no reason, right? with the power of vision, then you know exactly, you don't worry about aggressing past crossing lines. You know exactly where the lines are, and your ability to color precisely within them to like get the thing from point A to point B. You're celebrated for that, and you feel great about that. You self-constrain with no problem, happily. And we'll see all this in the sort of question of initiation today, right? But the question then is, how do you get the masculine to then activate in this way, right? To light up and engage in this manner, and then to talk about this. So that's the idea of the masculine, if you will, the quote unquote masculine, the inner masculine, the sacred masculine, however you want to call it. And so the question is, in the absence of vision, in the absence of the feminine, how do we heal the masculine, right? How do we heal the masculine? Of course, we need to bring the feminine back into the picture. We need to store. We need to make sure the world is not, the extreme patriarchy that it is, et cetera, et cetera. But then once the feminine comes back into the picture, what is the actual, how do I say this, mythopoetic mechanism? What is the set of mechanics that happens where the feminine then acts on the masculine to heal it and bring it, back into the proper channel that she needs it to be, and he's finally happy to know, like what the hell am I even doing here in the first place, right? And to talk about this, we need to talk about the phenomenon of initiation. Initiation is to catalyze and support. To initiate is to catalyze and support the transformation process from one state to the next. Now, the most common transformation series that we've talked about in this series of talks is the transformation process of caterpillar, cocoon to butterfly, right? And initiation then would be to support the transition of the individual from one phase to the next, right? So to support the caterpillar going into the cocoon, to support the cocoon going into the butterfly, right? I mean, the very first session of this entire series, this live Sacred Space series, was to sort of give comfort and support in time of pandemic. And the very first question we touched on was this whole pandemic thing. Is it a punishment or is it a transformation? Right? And to the very act of giving you that motif, that archetype of caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, to make the case that it was a transformation, was itself a form of initiation. Right? That's why I gave you comfort. I'm saying, here's a different, sacred lens from which to look at all the stuff that's happening around us. It's like we are a caterpillar going into the cocoon and going through. Even explaining that is a kind of initiation. I'm like revealing it to you. I'm initiating it to you. I'm initiating you into this like viewpoint. And, right at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone's like, well, Mother Nature has pissed at us and she's punishing us. And it's like, I'm not going to argue with that, but that's not the only way to look at it, right? That's not the only way to look at it. So initiation is almost like this midwife-ish support, mentoring support through one phase to the next to make sure, you make it through. And so for a man, or for the masculine, the phases of life, caterpillar, cocoon, butterfly, very roughly speaking. And I'm just going to, this whole talk, we're just going to skim the treetops because it's way too much to sort of go into. The masculine phases are boy, man, and king. Those are the three phases. And then maybe beyond king, there is the role of sage. Right, so on Yoda, Gandalf, Dumbledore. And very few actually make it to sage, if you will. And for feminine, you have an analogous similar set of phases. Girl, woman/mother, queen, right? And then maybe after queen is a phase we call crone. Or the feminine of sage would be saga, right? Saga, the sort of wise woman, the elder wise woman. And of course, in common vernacular, we call her the wise woman, the crone, the witch. And it's another clue that we live in a patriarchy, that if I say wise wizard, I can name all the, Gandalf, Dumbledore, Yoda, Morpheus, right? And when I say name 4 women versions of that, I'm like, I can't really name any, because we burn our witches, right? We don't accept authority from elder, right? Women who are sort of, say, in that crone phase become invisible because they're not useful to a patriarchy and all those sort of different, the more boyish functions we look for from the feminine. And it's a tragedy. As a result, we lose our vision, right? We lose, because vision comes from the feminine, and ideally the wisdom feminine, which is the crone, the elder saga wise woman, which, not as a Hecate, right? I mean, not as a bad thing. I mean, which has been sort of turned into an insult, but it's not, right? Any more than calling you a wizard is an insult. And so this all ties, but I'm basically saying the same thing in 12 different ways, right? We've lost our vision. We're a patriarchy. We're a profane, not sacred society. Okay, fine. Now, the details of this, of these phases are often culturally defined, right? So there will be differences from culture to culture, obviously, but that is just the general outline. Now, let me just double check make sure everything's working. Okay. Now, this is a huge topic. In case I forget, Hecate has been coming up for me a lot lately. And in the story, Hecate is actually the mother of both Pasiphae, which came up in the Theseus myth from last time, and also the mother of Circe, who is the goddess that figures prominently in the Odyssey. And I actually was reminded of that recently, actually in the past day, and it was just this moving thunderbolt of realization. So today's session is about the sacred masculine, but it's really impossible to really go deep on the masculine without bringing back the power of the muse and the guiding feminine, and we'll see that in droves in our mythic story today. If I ever stop talking and we get to it, okay. So this is a huge topic, and today we're just going to scratch the surface of one transition on one side, right? So we have boy, man, king, wizard, and then we have girl, woman / mother, queen, and then crone / witch. So there are multiple transformations on both sides. And today, just in the next few minutes, we're just going to scratch the surface of one transition, which is the initiation on the masculine side from boy to man. We're not even going to talk about man to king. That's a whole other, I just dream of the day where man to king is going to be like the issue. But right now, we live in a society of boys, uninitiated masculines. So the sort of punctuation mark here is going to be on the transition from boy to man, This is the critical thing for our current era. And now I just want to sort of give a bit of just a kind of heads up. When I talk about this initiation topic, I'm going to be drifting pretty sloppily from referring to this initiation as referring to the masculine as a principle in a person regardless of gender, and then also the initiation of actual physical boys in the external world, right? So one informs the other on a mythopoetic basis because the outer reflects the inner. But I just want to be careful in basically setting it up here that I'm not a scholar of these things, right? So when I'm going sloppily back and forth, it's going to be in the interest of time moving forward. It's not going to be a crisp, clean kind of like mathematical proof that we go through today. Okay. So a couple things to say here about masculine / male initiation, right? Specifically from boy to man. Man to king, king to wizard, those are all different transformations, but specifically from boy to man. The initiation of the masculine at this phase is a heavily culturally driven thing. And the basic reason for that is that in a boy, in a physical boy, when he becomes biologically, at least, not culturally, biologically a man, the changes tend to be pretty gradual. Like he gets stronger, he does reach puberty, he activates sexually, for the most part, right? Just biophysically. But there are no like cataclysmic changes in the biophysics of the male body as he goes from boy to man. With women, with the female side, there are massive changes, right? All throughout the life cycle. Menstruation is a massive, complete rewiring of everything in a woman's body as she goes from girl to woman. Childbirth is a massive restructuring of everything, right? I mean, before your child is born, you're like thinking about you as a sort of gladiator in the arena. And once your child is in your arms, everything changes, right? You become like number two, and this little slimy peanut that you're holding becomes like number one. You would like die for this little thing, right? So it's a huge transformation. And then menopause, right? Menopause is a huge physical transformation. So with women, there are massive changes through the life cycle that are punctuated by changes in the body. So the triggers are biophysical as well. And as a result, it's much, much harder, not impossible, but it's much, much harder to avoid and mess with the natural rhythms of the feminine sort of life cycle and initiation. Although we do try, right? We do try with, with like the pill, with hormonal things, with like the female Viagra that they've been trying to come up with. I mean, the old joke is like, I'm not even going to go there. So we'll do that in an after party someday. We'll make all our jokes about that stuff later. But I mean, for instance, right, menstruation is a biophysical fact, right? It's happening whether you like it or not. And then culturally, you can celebrate it or try to shame it or just cover it in silence and not talk about it. But you can't ignore it, right? It is happening, right? You do need to sort of deal with it and engage with it. For men, then, the biophysical changes and functions are much more gradual and subtle. So when you initiate a boy into a man, it's more of a cultural function, because the active initiation on the male side becomes the heavy lifting of the work is more one of instilling vision and purpose as to why you even exist in the first place. Right? You are naturally in a supporting role. Right? In a patriarchy, it's split where it's like all about the guys. But if you just look at the biophysical function, it's like, life comes from the woman. That's like the center of everything. Right? So the masculine that orbits around her, that himself comes from the woman. Right? We're all born from women. Is intrinsically, right, biomechanically in a supporting role. And so initiation is programming that unit of society as to what his job actually is, right? And this is highly cultural. It differs from culture to culture, but we've already talked about like the basic sort of DNA of the function of the masculine, which is boundary protector and manifester, right? You're a forward scout to get the things we need, even to make war if necessary on neighboring tribes to get the sort of nutrients we need, the nourishment, the resources. And, little boys who start protecting boundaries, protecting mama, right? And then, getting sort of points for going out and scoring goals on the sort of athletic field. You can say, well, this is just a sort of wound of Western culture. But you look at many cultures, it's the same sort of set of values in different forms, but the basic DNA is there, right? And so the basic sort of job of initiation is to make sure that the boy, as he becomes a man in society, and we give him all of the honors and privileges and powers of being a full-powered man in society, understands his role and responsibility, which basically from culture to culture, there'll be differences. But the basic role and requirement is that the masculine in society is required to serve and even sacrifice his life in the service of society. And when properly initiated, men will fulfill these needs happily, They will go into battle terrified, but they won't turn back, right? They'll go in and know why they're doing what they're doing, and they will do it. It's natural to be terrified, but they will do it willingly, right? They will do it voluntarily. And every man within him already knows at this level, at this rough cut level, right? Not refined after, even if it's not refined after initiation, he knows this rough cut level. He knows that this is why men are, for instance, are sent off to war in a traditional society, right? Why are men in our societies typically the ones being sent off to war? It's not because they're stronger or more capable. You can train a woman to grow big muscles and hold a gun and swing a sword too, just fine, right? But the reason it's the men that are sent to war is not because they're more capable. It's because they are dispensable, right? I mean, I've said this in the past, but if you have like, a village of 100 people, 50-50, and you send all your women off to war and there's one woman left and 50 men, right? The only way you keep that, I mean, that village is not going to continue. There's only one woman to sort of give birth and 50 men. That village is gone. It's over, right? So the women are not dispensable. The men are dispensable, because in that same sort of ludicrous example, if you only have one man left over after you've won the war, that one very lucky man, very overworked man, right, will be able to continue, right, the sort of generativity and fruitfulness, right, of the village with the 50 other women, right? It's just simple biology and math. So men basically, in this way, are expendable, and we know that, right? And when properly initiated, we get that, and we're like, okay, that's cool. And so just, tell me what I need to do, and I'll go do it. Right? And I'm happy to do that. Right? Even in modern day movies, right? When movies are made for young men, right? It's like things blowing up and all of this stuff. But the really good movies that really do well are the ones not just with the best special effects and not just with the best kind of action scenes and sort of most things blowing up. These stories are stories of initiation, where you hear over and over, right, where the young man is trying to find purpose and the thing that is bigger than me that I can serve and even sacrifice myself for. So Luke Skywalker, it's this quest to sort of figure out what his purpose in life is. His uncle says it's just to be a farmer, and he feels like there's something more. And then the mentor, Ben Kenobi, comes in and says, yes, there is something more. Avatar, I think one of the first things out of the young hero's mouth is like, all I ever wanted was something I could believe in, right? And the key then to initiation is to instill this higher sense of purpose to the point where it supersedes the individual in priority. Where ideally, right, the masculine will give their lives for it if needed. And when you reach that point, then you have a man on your hands. Okay. Now, this is true for men in general, and we can make all kinds of societal sort of comments on that. But it's also true for the inner masculine as well. So regardless of your gender, right, I would almost say, we don't have time to get into this, I would almost say, especially if you're a woman in this age, the initiation of the inner masculine from boy to man and even to king is a critical thing for protecting the life of the woman so that her vision can fully come through, right? And I'll just sort of say that a little bit and leave that there for now. A couple more comments. A man, is someone who knows what he lives for. And we really can't know what you live for until you realize what you are willing to die for. Right? The thing that you are dying for is the thing that is bigger than your own individual self. Said another way, to use another image that we've used in the past, the mythos after initiation is seen clearly, such that the logos takes a backseat. The function of initiation is to install the mythos of that society into the boy. And when it takes, hopefully it takes, sometimes it doesn't, he then transforms into a man. The opposite which I think unfortunately will be a very familiar scenario to a lot of us, is to say, the thought experiment. Have you ever noticed that when men in our society, powerful men, are only all about themselves, right? They're like, oh, I'm like the CEO, captain of industry. I'm like the celebrity. Everyone loves me. I'm like launching my technological wonders and et cetera, et cetera. When men are basically only for themselves, it's never this feeling of happiness. There's always this feeling of, sarcasm and bitterness and anger and cynicism, right? It's never generous, right? If you look at some of the, I'll just say, more controversial leaders of countries in our current world, right? There's never this feeling of generosity, and there's always this feeling that they are themselves behind closed doors in a ton of pain, right? Privileged males who are douchey and self-pleasuring and all about their own pleasure and consumption. They're also always, when you see them in this mode, super angry. Right. And I talked about when we were talking about, racism several sessions back. It's like you already have everything. You're at the top of the pyramid and you can abuse and use everyone around you basically with profane impunity. And yet you're really angry. And the question is, why is someone who's on top and, suppressing females and suppressing people of color and all of that, they're at the top of the pyramid. They've won. They're like the king. They're winning so much. They're sick of winning. Why are they so angry? Right. And the answer, of course, is that person has no mythos. Right. That person has no higher vision. And so even though he's consuming all of the world to fill this hole that can't be filled within him, he is angry because it's the additional shame on shame of the fact that I'm already on top. I've got my boot on the neck of the rest of the world, and I'm still not happy. What the heck is wrong with me? And there's a shame around that as well, right? And yet a fear of letting go. That's a life that's driven just by logos and not mythos. That's what a life feels like when you don't even know what your mythos is. You don't even know there's a thing that exists that's even called a mythos. It's all logos. It's all money, power, celebrity, prestige, and no honor, no vision, no blessing. It's all curse. Right? Said another way, there's a difference between prestige, fame, celebrity on the one side, and actual honor and blessing on the other. And if a person doesn't feel what the difference is when I say that, then it is highly likely that that person is uninitiated. No one's pulled them aside to explain the difference. And now most of us are. It's no offense. It's just where we are as a culture for now. And in fact, in many ways, it can be said that the mark of a profane society is the absence of initiation, the absence of an installed, activated mythos, right? Where there's no fulfillment of a larger pattern. It's just the indiscriminate hunger of consumption, material consumption, greed, anger, glamour, image, prestige, celebrity, for no higher purpose. It's just an empty hole that you constantly try to fill and soothe and shield, but never actually heal. Now, to heal it, to restore the power of the sacred, one temple section at a time, we must first restore the power of the feminine, right? That's how I've come to see it over time. And we will see some of the mythopoetics of how this works in the story that Artie will take us through. For me, the feminine is the trigger that gives shape and vision to the mythos of inner masculine, and then catalyzes male initiation. Right? An uninitiated man will not know what his role is and what is expected of him. And he will feel this anger within him about it. He will seek to find initiation. I mean, in sort of urban environments where there are inner city gangs running around, this has been thought of by some thinkers as like a bunch of boys coming together trying to initiate each other, because it's a biological desire, right, for a boy to find a mentor, find initiation, and pull himself into manhood. Just as it's in the nature of any acorn to try its best to grow into an oak tree. And this has been the situation in our world for a long time. Even Hemingway, right, in the 20s and 30s, the American novelist, referred to them as the great American boy men. He would characterize American society as an adolescent society where nobody receives this kind of initiation. Right, and the difference from that lens between a boy and a man is that a boy will look at a woman, for instance, or anything, Mother Nature, anything, and think, how can this as a resource pleasure me? Right, sexual pleasure, prestige pleasure, you've got a pretty girl on your arm, validation pleasure, to basically fill the hole, right, at the level of need and want, are the only lenses you see society through. Whereas an initiated, fully grown man will ask, what is this person's vision? Right? What is the vision of this woman? What is the vision of this tract of land and nature? Right? What is the land telling me that it wants to be done? And then how can I partner with this power to build something together? Right? The first question is a question of the logos. The second question is the question of the mythos. And that is kind of the signal difference between initiated and uninitiated. Now, we as a society have lost cultural aspects of male transformation and initiation because we live in a profane society. Right? When you stuff down the feminine, you just lose a lot. Right? And in looking at just this one section of initiation, just for a few minutes, hopefully you get the flavor of the depth of what we lost just in this one section, let alone all the other sections. It is a profound, the wound of patriarchy, especially having taken root for 2,500 years now. It's profound, right? It will be generations upon generations for us to sort of heal this wound. When I feel I do my work, I'm planting olive trees. I'm not planting apple or peach trees. I will never taste the olives of the trees I'm planting, and that's okay. Right? It's okay. And when a man goes into initiation with a group of mentors that bring him into initiation, he goes intrinsically into the realm of the sacred, intrinsically into the realm of love, surrender, and nurturing, to be taught to ask the question of how shall I serve? How shall I serve? This is why even the military is one of the last bastions of the sacred. Now, depending on the country in which the military operates, it can be profane like anything else. It can be profane like the Catholic Church can be profane, like any religion can be profane. But at its core, it is a sacred function. Right? It is the ultimate boundary protection function of society. So when we lose this sacredness. When we lose this, it's also why, by the way, our politicians, right, across the Western world and leaders often have this feeling of being these boy men, right, where there's no vision, first of all, but also kind of strangely, there's a strange childlike quality to a lot of our leaders in the modern world, not just now, but in the past 50 years, right? They're strangely childish and whiny and have this feeling of victimhood. And they never rise to ask much of us as the body politic, because they themselves have no vision for why they would even ask you to sacrifice anything. But even after 9/11, the American president was go out and go shopping, right? Restart the economy. There is no higher vision. Even now, right, there are many leaders around the country who can't even bring themselves to ask you to wear a mask in public in the middle of the pandemic. They are utterly impotent to ask anything because they have not been installed with the mythos. They are uninitiated men. They are boys in men's bodies. And now you can't shame them for that, because in our current world, males in that form, boys in men's bodies, are the majority. They are the norm in our modern profane society. So you can't shame them, and you can't just be like superior or whatever. That's not helping anything, right? It is a wound. And let me put it another way. Any human male who is 40 or 50 years old and still what I refer to as a boy in a man's body, you can laugh and you can sneer, but also, you don't want to be him either. Right? That boy in a man's body is living a life of like living hell, which actually is why they're so angry and why they're so greedy about pulling in all these resources to like soothe and numb, why they're so violent about it. Right? I'm not asking you to have pity on them, but I'm just saying this state of affairs is not helping anyone. Right? You're like, oh, they have the boot on the neck of the rest of the world. And I'm like, yeah, but look at them. They're in living hell themselves. Right? So this entire state of affairs is like a lose, lose, lose across everything. And so the question is, for me, not where do we assign blame and what's right or wrong or whatever. It's just like, okay, this is a state of affairs where we're all screwed. Right? We are all being screwed by this state of affairs. So the question then is just, okay, forget about who did what like 2,500 years ago, Abraham and the burning bush. Let's just not even talk about that. Here in the now, what do we do about this now? How do you heal all of modern society going forward? And this, frankly, is the question that I basically put my life to. And this is the focus of my own life's work and bliss and meaning and purpose in life, as guided by the feminine, by a being I call the muse, who's feminine. How do you restore the power and vision sacred in a world that has gone basically all profane? Right? And the answer is, I've got a lot of stuff cooking, but I don't know the full answer yet. I'm working on it. I'm working on it. But my mythos, as installed, is basically to attempt, as best I can, to restore the power of the sacred in our world, which basically means to restore the power of the visionary feminine. And when this is done, then she will tell us what initiation looks like and all the rest of it. I mean, basically, she is already telling us, right? We just don't have ears to hear right now because we're in the profane. We can't hear over the noise of the goat sellers, right, and the souvenir sellers. Now, in the story we'll hear from Gowrie, we will see very precisely how the power of the visionary feminine comes in and guides the initiation of the masculine. So look out for the feminine in Gowrie's story and keep an eye on what she does. And so before we dive into that for initiation, I do want to give you a small example of the flavor and the feeling of properly done male and masculine initiation. And then we'll have our story with Gowrie. Because I want you to like come away with not the feeling of like, all men are like bums and throw them out and, oh, ha, 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 they've screwed up initiation. That'll show Abraham for making this a patriarchy. It's more this sort of, as we lost the sacred it was just a wound. It was just a wound. I mean, human society just fell into a hole, right? And even then you could say the 2,500 years of patriarchy is it a punishment or is it a transformation? Right? This pandemic, this 2.5 millennium pandemic of patriarchy and the loss and pain for everyone, men and women alike. You can see if you are generous enough, and I'm not sure I'm even generous enough to see it like this, massive circumambulation and transformation, and not a punishment, right? You can if you have a big enough heart, and I don't even think I have a big enough heart for that. But I want to give you this small example so you have a feeling for how much of a loss it is for the masculine as well to be in a patriarchy, how much a loss of love and the sacred it is for a boy to be uninitiated all his life. So that even when he is, in his 70s and like the leader of a major Western country, his life is still a living hell of nothing but anger and pettiness, right? And he knows it, and he doesn't know what to do about it, and he's just going to flail until he physically dies. So what is the example to give you a flavor of it? It is so one of the ways we know what we know about initiation is through the anthropological study of sort of traditional tribes in Africa, in Australia, in America. And there's a story about what initiation looks like from the Kikuyu tribe of Africa, if memory serves. I just pulled this from memory. I didn't look up the full thing. But the story has always stayed with me. And the way initiation works with the Kikuyu is that, and I'll just give the quick flavor of it. When the boys reach that age, it's like 11 to 13, they look for certain signs. It's not just a chronological rubber stamp. Up until that point, they live in the hut of the mother. They live in the realm of, okay. And then when the time comes, the men of the village, all the men, uncles, friends of the father, but not the father himself, because there's too much competitive tension there. So the father is not involved in the initiation of his own son. It's all the allo parents, the allo fathers, the other sort of mentors that come in. And what they do is they come masked in all their gear and everything. And they come in, they demand the boy. The mother says, no, 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 don't take my little baby. And they ceremonially, ritually push her aside, put her to the side, come in and drag the child kicking and screaming, mama, mama. And all the women come out, behind the mother, like pounding the dirt on their knees, going, don't take my baby. The boy is screaming and crying, terrified. He's like, these guys are going to come take me off into the forest and kill me. And, the mom is like gnashing her teeth and saying, don't go, don't go. And then once they're in the forest and they're out of sort of earshot and out of, out of eyesight, the mom gets up, dusts herself off, turns to her sister and says, how do you think I did this year? And she's like, yeah, you did all right. It was a little bit, not quite as passionate as his older brother when he went, but you did all right, sis. You did all right. So, I mean, the point is that it was all not a ruse, but it's like the women know this will happen and they know they have a role to play and they play it. And this is all done in love to support and enable the initiation of the young boy, right? So a painful separation and pulling away from the mother realm is number one. Then they're brought into the middle of the forest, in the middle of the forest, in a hut that the men have built just for the purpose of the boy's initiation. They're kept in there, not fed anything for something like 3 days. They're like terrified. And then the very first thing, and this is the last thing I'll share about this, there's so much to talk about. But the very first thing they have is that the men come in, they sit in a circle, and the boys are like hallucinating at that point. They haven't eaten or drank for 3 days. They're terrified. They think, oh, they're gonna kill and eat us, right? We're like the rejects. They sit in a circle, and the head man takes out his hunting knife, and there's a special ritual bowl, and he opens a vein in his arm and bleeds into the bowl. And then the bowl is passed around for all the men, all the older men, to contribute blood. They all take their knives out and bleed into the bowl. And then the bowl of blood is passed to the boys to drink from. And this is the first nourishment they've had in 3 days to bring them back into this initiatory realm. And I wanted to share that just to give you a feeling of, in a traditional culture, that's the level of intensity of the love that happens in initiation, right? So what does this drinking of blood even mean? One of the most powerful messages of a symbolic ritual act like this is the message that nourishment comes also from other men, not just from mother's milk, right? As your fellow man in society, I can nourish you too. My body doesn't produce milk, but I can willingly give my blood to nourish you, and I do. And the thing you're drinking right now, it's not just symbolic, it's proof. I'm putting my blood in a cup for you to drink from, right? And the cup is this feminine sort of cauldron-like, womb-like vessel. So the power of men to love and nourish each other, the power of men to use their weapons for hunting and warfare, not to wound others or hurt others, but to willingly sort of wound, not in a bad way, but wound themselves, make themselves vulnerable for the act of nourishing another man, right, to bring him forward. And it's just, especially when you're this boy and you don't have no idea what's happening, this is the first step of realization of the power of love among men, right? The power of love among men. This realization of looking at the world not from the inside out of the mother's world, right? But in a world where it's just men and the masculine, and there is this capability of love, nurturing, and surrender, right? I'm surrendering my life force, literally my blood for you. Love, nurturing, and surrender in the company of men, right? So when I say love, nurturing, and surrender, what am I talking about? I'm talking about sacred space. Initiation into the sacred space of men, so that you yourself can take your place among them, and then be installed with the mythos of the Kikuyu or whatever sort of tribe it is that's initiating you, so that you can function as a member, so that you go through life knowing what you're supposed to do and doing it happily, right? It's actually similar to the sacred space we share here, where you coming into sacred space at the beginning of the series as a kind of initiation, to realize, for some of us for the first time, that your nourishment, your emotional and spiritual nourishment, does not come just from religion or just from family or from love affairs. It also comes from the pure sacred with other people, even if we are strangers, and even if we are not physically proximate in the same room. And to experience this kind of nourishment is itself its own kind of mini initiation. So the feeling you have here, you just sort of imagine multiplying that by 1,000,000 as a little boy in this village. You get the flavor of the power of initiation. And that is what we've lost. That is what we've lost. Right? When we say the great American boy man and the world is populated by boys in men's bodies, we're not just being ridiculed and shaming, saying, ha, you guys are idiots. We're touching the jugular of a profound state of wretchedness. And we're opening the door to grief that for generations upon generations, our men have been deprived of exactly this experience of love that I just described in the Kikuyu initiation as an example. It's just one of thousands of examples across cultures. So it's sad for the world that we have all these boy men running around like wreaking havoc, incinerating everything, screwing everything up. But it's sad for them too, right? They're not doing it because they're like, woohoo, I'm like the guy in power. They may say that and appear like that, but they're doing it out of pain themselves. And so the question ultimately is, what the hell do we do about all this, right? So anyway, so this is a bit of the flavor of just the initiation transformation from boy to man on the masculine side. It applies to boys, it applies to men, but it also applies to the transformation of your own inner masculine as well, regardless of your gender as a person. Your own inner masculine, the signal question is, where does his vision come from? And what is the vision? And has it been installed in your own inner masculine? In your own inner masculine. So if you often have the feeling that both my inner masculine and my inner feminine are suppressed, we see this all the time. The question is, well, which goes first, right? This is specific to each individual, right? It's often a team lift. This is what we do when we do our healing stuff together, right? But it will often start with one side, the masculine or feminine. They move ahead enough to be able to sort of hold space and give shelter to everyone else. And then the other one comes forward. So it's like a team lift. It's like, let's say the feminine goes first and then the masculine, and then the feminine and then the masculine. They like help each other and give each other cover as they advance in the circumambulation. So a lot of our time in healing, right, when we do healing work, is spent on the specifics of this very question of inner masculine, inner feminine recovery. And it's just an amazing experience for me to be able to help with this process. I love it. And that's part of why it's my bliss. Okay, so those are my comments overall. And now to bring it forward a little more, what I want to do is I want to hand it over to Gowrie, who will tell us about the story that she has selected. She will tell the story. Gowrie, you can come up anytime. She'll do what we've been doing the last few sessions. She'll tell the story, and then we'll kind of banter back and forth with our comments.
Hi, Artie. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear and see you just great.
Okay. Thank you. Right.
So what have you selected for our mythic story exercise today?
Oh, it's an epic story. I'm a little nervous if I'll be able to fit it in time. This is basically the story of Odysseus, but we're only going to touch the aspect of Odysseus' son, Telemachus, and we're only going to talk about the story from his perspective today. So we're not going into the epic adventurous journey that Odysseus has had after the fall of Troy, right? So that's a very long story, so maybe that's for another session. But today it's only about Telemachus. Yeah. So that's
okay. So I'll let you. I'll go off camera and I'll let you tell the story.
Okay, right. I'll bring you back when I'm done.
Okay.
Thanks, Artie. So the story of Telemachus, right? He's the son of Odysseus, the only son, because when Telemachus was a baby, Odysseus left for war, and this is all of the war of Troy and how it panned out, and what happened. All of it that comes in this epic poem called the Iliad. But then the next sequel to it, if you may call it that, is the return of Odysseus back home, because that's another epic adventure, an epic journey. So in all of this entire saga, right, takes about 20 years, 10 years for the Battle of Troy, and 10 years for Odysseus to return home. So we're going to talk about what it looks like back home in Ithaca. Ithaca is the home of Odysseus. What does Ithaca look like when Odysseus is away for almost a lifetime? And while he's away, when he left, his son Telemachus was a baby. And now he is, we're talking the timeline right now is 19 years after he left. So he is like a 19 or 20-year-old young man. And his wife, Penelope, right, still waiting, still wondering what happened to Odysseus. They've had no news from him. The Battle of Troy took 10 years. And then when all the warriors, the victors, after looting and pillaging Troy, set back home, it wasn't all, because they were victorious, yay, and, happy and proud and getting back home to be, sort of honored. Strangely, in the process, they had ended up angering some gods, most of all Athena, right? And none of their journeys back home was what they thought it's going to be. They all had some kind of tragedy to reckon with. Some kind of ordeal to go through. And most of all, Odysseus, which is surprising because he's one of Athena's favorites, but he had to go through his own ordeal. And 9 years later, he's still not back home. And on Ithaca, Penelope is waiting. Telemachus is waiting. They're desperate. And what has happened is, except for these two, everyone else has accepted that Odysseus is dead. He's not coming back. And what that leads to is that there is a whole swarm of men who've now landed in Odysseus's palace wanting to marry Penelope. So they think Penelope is a widow and she should marry now. So the suitors have landed up and they are pressuring Penelope to marry again. And, she is in a state where she can't even accept that Odysseus is dead and is not going to come back. She still hopes, she still believes that he might come back. And these suitors are unruly, but the house is just up for grabs, kind of a situation, right? So all the suitors, they assemble in the hall, they eat and drink and make merry as they like. They are trying to persuade Penelope to marry them. And while they're doing this, they're eating up Odysseus' store of provisions, slaughtering his cattle, his sheep, his swine, drinking his wine. They're making merry at the cost of, Odysseus' wealth. And Penelope, she doesn't know what to do. All she's doing is, trying to stall this whole thing. And she makes them wait and wait and wait, hoping that, they'll get tired and they'll leave when they've had enough. But the men, why would they leave? There's food here. There's so much fun to be had. They don't want to leave. They're just there. So Penelope comes up with this excuse that I need to weave this, exquisite shroud in honor of Odysseus' father. So I won't make a decision until I've finished weaving. So she kind of locks herself up in the room. The suitors say, okay, it's a very honorable and a sacred task. So, all right, let us know when you're done. And she kind of goes into her room. She's weaving. And what she's really doing is it's a clever strategy where she weaves through the day. And then at the end of the day, at night, she unravels everything that she's woven until then. So basically, there's no progress, right? She can go on indefinitely, and she hopes to go on indefinitely until Odysseus returns. But somehow the suitors find out what she's been up to. So then they start pressuring her again. So it's come to this very impossible situation where Penelope can no longer stall them. And Telemachus doesn't know what to do. And there's a kind of a suspended state where nothing's moving forward, nothing's moving backward. It's just all in a kind of suspended animation. And this 9 years have passed, and Athena finally figures that, this has gone on long enough. I think we really need to put an end to this. So she convinces all the gods to help Odysseus make his final journey back home in quick time. But also she thinks, Telemachus is really a good boy. He's pious, he is sober, he's got a good head on his shoulders, he's steady, he's prudent, he's dependable, he's all of that. He really needs to kind of come into his own, when he's at that age. It would be a good thing for him to make a journey to go find some news about his father while I'm helping Odysseus come back home. So one day, Athena takes the form of a seafaring man, right? And she lands up at the palace. And she stands at the door of the palace, waiting to see if someone will come and kind of greet him. And she's assumed the form of a man. Telemachus looks at that man and he immediately rushes to the door because he thinks, he needs help. He asks him what he can do, invites him inside, gets him something to eat and drink, and is generally very hospitable, very amicable, right? And this man tells him, I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you, but what is going on here? Right? This palace doesn't look like a palace, it looks like a pub. What are all these people doing? And I'm really sorry if this is how the order of things are at your place, and I don't mean to offend by this comment, but it just seems like these men are behaving very inappropriately. Is this how this is? I mean, what's really going on? And then, that is when it really stings and hurts Telemachus. And he's found this man who, finally there's someone who to just look at things from his perspective, and he shares with him what has happened. He says, my father is away. It's been nearly 20 years. There's no one, and this is the situation. This is what's happening. So this man then says, well, then I think it would be a good thing for you to do, considering all this, to go out and look for your father, at least look for some news of him, to know what's going on, at least bring some finality to this, right? If your father's lost or died or whatever has happened, you need to know. You can't just be sitting here and doing nothing about it. So how about you build a ship and take some men with you and go looking for some news? And, the message comes across so powerfully that Telemachus is really moved. And after the man leaves, he starts to believe that this man must have been someone divine come to deliver this message to him. So he goes to the beach, looks at the sea and prays to Athena and says, help me. I want to do this. I want to go looking for news of my father, and I need your help. And Athena hears this, and she again takes the form of a friend of Odysseus. His name is Mentor. And he's the oldest friend Odysseus has, and Odysseus trusts him with his life. And Mentor comes up to him on the beach and asks him what's going on. And Telemachus tells him that this is the thing, I intend to go on this journey. And Mentor encourages him and says, okay, you should go and announce to your assembly that this is what you're going to do. And when Telemachus goes back to the palace, he calls the assembly and he says, I intend to take a ship and go looking for news of my father. And instantly, all the suitors who've gathered there start laughing at him, jeering him and mocking him and saying, oh, I mean, really, you think you have it in you to do that? I think, just sit down. You're not going anywhere. So, Telemachus, hearing all this kind of feels disheartened, but at the same time, he wants to do it. So he goes back to Mentor and says, this is what happened when I announced what I'm going to do. And Mentor says, never mind all that. You get your ship ready and I will come with you, right? I will sail with you. I know where to take you. Maybe Odysseus's friends who went to war with him, one of the friends is Nestor from Pylos. We'll go to Pylos, we'll meet with Nestor, we'll ask him if he has any news, right? So I'll come with you. And Telemachus feels great about this. So the next morning they set off and they reach Pylos, they meet Nestor. Nestor's really old now. And they ask him if he has any news. They know if he knows anything about Odysseus. And Nestor feels very sad because he's been home for quite some time now and Odysseus still hasn't turned up. And he says, I have absolutely no idea. We all left Troy 10 years ago, but, we've had some trouble and all that, but I've no news of Odysseus. Sorry, but here's something I can do. I do think if you go to Menelaus in Sparta, he might have some news. And I can even leave your ship here, go by road. I'll send a chariot and one of my sons with you, because that's quicker. And when you go to Sparta, ask Menelaus if he has any news of his father. I'm sure he'll know something that will help you, right? And then this sounds like the only option to take. So Telemachus agrees. Mentor decides to stay with the ship, stay back, and Telemachus goes with one of Nestor's sons. And they reach Sparta. They go to Menelaus' palace, where Menelaus welcomes them, gives them a royal treatment, welcomes them into the house, talks to them. And then Telemachus asks him, I'm Odysseus' son. And I've come here basically to ask you if you've heard about Odysseus. We don't know what's happened to him. And Menelaus says, well, it's funny. I really heard about Odysseus when I myself was stuck on an island, shipwrecked, and I had my whole ordeal to go through. And that was the last I heard about Odysseus, but I heard a strange thing about him. The sea god Proteus himself told me that Odysseus was stuck on an island and he was homesick, and he was kept there by a nymph called Calypso, and she wouldn't let him go. And Odysseus was pining away on that island. But I heard the story about 10 years ago. I don't know what's happened since, but that was a long time ago. I'm sorry. And when hearing this, Telemachus is so sort of distraught and upset over this. But at the same time, talking about this triggers all the memories of Troy for Menelaus as well, even for Nestor's son. And they sit together, and by this time, even Helen has come and joined them. They're all sitting together in this place and remembering the days of fighting in Troy. Menelaus recounts some of the adventures he and Odysseus have had together. And all of those memories come back, and Menelaus starts shedding tears for all the friends and warriors that he has lost. And Nestor's son starts crying as well for all the warriors, Pylos has lost. And then Helen starts crying, and she has all sorts of, bitter memories of her own. And then Telemachus starts crying. So there is this whole, atmosphere of grief and loss. And Menelaus tells them that you should rest tonight here at Sparta, and you could leave, when you feel comfortable, but stay here until then. So Telemachus and Nestor's son both stay back for the night, but in the morning, Telemachus gets this divine kind of message from Athena that he should now leave and get back to Ithaca. So they leave the next morning. And in that inspiration, Telemachus also feels like instead of going straight to the palace after landing at Ithaca, he should first go and check with Eumaeus, the swineherd who lives near the coast. So he goes straight to the cottage, and he comes to Eumaeus and he says, I just wanted to know, I've come back from Ithaca. I'd like you to kind of let me know if there is anything out of the ordinary that has happened while I was away. And indeed, while he was away, there's a whole section of adventure we won't touch today, but while he was away, Odysseus has returned to Ithaca. But he's still not sure, right? Odysseus being Odysseus, he's not sure what has passed in Ithaca while he was away. So he first goes to Eumaeus to check with him, but even there he's careful. He don't know what state of affairs or what politics is being played right now. So he goes to Eumaeus in disguise, dressed like a tramp. But Eumaeus recognizes him, and they've had that exchange. So by the time Telemachus reaches there, Eumaeus looks at Telemachus as in tears, as emotional, and he tells him, you need to sit down. You need to sit down and kind of rest and eat and drink a little before the next thing happens, in a way. And Odysseus reveals himself. At one moment he's a tramp, and the next moment he's this majestic man standing in front of Telemachus. And he's overjoyed. And because of Eumaeus, he now knows that this is Telemachus, his son, right? He's overjoyed to see his son. And he tells him, I'm your father. And Telemachus and Odysseus embrace each other and burst into tears. And there's that reunion that happens. But at the same time, they know that they have more work to do. There's a whole, set of suitors who've taken over the palace, and they need to kind of work on getting rid of them. And they sit down and discuss how they're going to do that. And then they go to the palace. They take care of the suitors, defeat them, and send them away. I'm not going to go into too many details of that, because in this story, I wanted to focus on the reunion of the father and son, which happens, funnily, if you look at it, the entire plot, the journey of Telemachus doesn't add anything to Odysseus's journey or doesn't move the plot any further, but it's a very important journey for Telemachus's own growth in the story. And Athena decides to initiate this journey by wearing the guise of the seafaring man and telling him that you need to go on this journey. And one of the things the man tells him is that you need this journey, and it will also elevate, your image in the eyes of other men as a man who took this journey to find news about his father instead of sitting and twiddling his thumbs and just watching helplessly everything that was going on. So that is the story of Telemachus. So Artie, would you like to come on and then share your comments as well?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
That was amazing. Thank you for sharing that. It's not often I get to sit and just listen to the story of Telemachus. So thank you. That's awesome. That's awesome. Should I make some comments?
Yes. Yeah.
As I was listening, I was like taking some notes here, and I think so the first thing I'll say, which I always say, is when I read a myth or a dream, the way I do it, it's not the only way to do it. The way I do it is that I read such that mythopoetically, I read with a mythopoetic lens. And what that means to me is that you regard every major actor in the dream or myth as a symbol of a different part of your own inner self.
Right.
So in this myth, Telemachus is a part of you. Athena is a part of you. Mentor, Nestor, Menelaus is a part of you. The swineherd is a part of you. The swine are a part of you, which I'll make a side mention of. And Odysseus, Penelope, Calypso, Circe, Nausicaa are all different parts of you. Yeah. And so the beauty of the Odyssey overall, I realized the other day that it is basically a sacred text to me. It's something that I've just read so much that I've taken care of, that it's starting to take care of me now. It's always taken care of me. Is that as you read through the Odyssey, it is this huge clockwork of a diorama, if you will, of the different workings of how inner masculine and inner feminine eventually come back into full reunion. Right? Like Telemachus and his mother, Telemachus and Eurycleia, right? The old nurse, Odysseus, with all the other feminine figures, Circe, Nausicaa, Calypso, Scylla and Charybdis, the sirens, right? And the nurse mother, the old nurse who recognizes him first through the scar on his thigh, right? The sort of Fisher King-like wound in the thigh. All of these things, the olive tree, Odysseus and Athena, right? These are all sort of mini sort of looks at the larger tapestry of how inner masculine and inner feminine cyclically come together and then part again and then come together, right? So if you want to learn something mythopoetically about how the dynamic of inner masculine and inner feminine work, the Odyssey itself is like this inexhaustible cornucopia of wisdom. The one that I like to read is the Stephen Mitchell translation. Right. I mean, I grew up in like my Jesuit Catholic school reading Lattimore, right? And Harvard reading Lattimore under Professor Naj, but this is like very readable. It reads like a page-turning novel, basically. So that's the first thing to say. You read every part of it as a part of a different part of your own inner self. And the key thing here is that just like with the Kikuyu initiation, the key to Telemachus's initiation, because Telemachus is the emerging inner masculine. He's the young man coming up out of you, this inner masculine power. And the question is, someone was asking in the chat on Facebook, we had this question, even as a woman, right? Even as a woman, how do I initiate my own inner masculine? Because I need him, right? I need my Telemachus. I need my Odysseus. How do I do it? And the same question of a man initiating your own inner masculine. And one of the keys is that Telemachus needs to leave the realm of the mother.
Right.
If he left Penelope, actually I made, Penelope, when she finds out that he's left, is super pissed. She's like, there's no reason for him to sail off on one of those ships men drive like chariots. He's going to die for sure. How could he wish to die far off with a name that will be forgotten? How could he do this? He's my only son. How could he leave? And she's like, if I had learned that he had been planning, because he left without telling her.
Without telling her, yes.
Without telling her. And she says, this is Penelope, if I had learned that he had been planning this voyage, I swear he would have never left, or it would have been over my dead body. Right? How many mothers have said that about their sons? Right? So it's this natural thing to hang on.
Yeah.
And it is the men who, like in the Kikuyu tribe, are pulling forcibly the boy out of the world of the mother, out of the womb of the hut of the mother. Yeah. And the mother knows this. She's like, oh yeah, I can't wait for him to leave anyway. She's like, pounding the earth, playing her part.
Yeah.
Now people are like, well, this is men versus women and this constant tension. And I would say yes, but no. Right? It's a clockwork of integration that's underlying everything for a couple of reasons. The first is, when we read this, Mentor and Nestor and Telemachus are all aspects of your own inner masculine. Right. Penelope, the mother that won't let go, is an aspect of your own inner feminine. It's not your real mother. That's just a reflection. It's an aspect of, this is all the sort of biological mythopoetic stuff going on inside you. It's like watching, this sort of glucose cycle in your body, right? It's a tapestry of how your life force is surging forward and working, right? Yeah. So that's the first thing. They're all a part of you. So this is not a male versus female kind of political, societal, cultural thing. This is how the chemicals and enzymes work within you. That's number one. And number two, which is part of the gorgeousness of the Odyssey and ancient Greek culture, literature itself, this entire state of affairs is set into motion by Athena.
Yeah.
Who is the visionary inner feminine. Yeah. It is the visionary inner feminine who is driving Odysseus and guiding him across his transformation and initiating him. And it is the visionary inner feminine. Your Athena is a part of you. Yeah. It is this Athena inner visionary muse, part of you, right, that is driving forward the initiation of Telemachus, pushing him, taking the form of Mentor, taking the form of Nestor. So it's these men coming in, telling him, you got to get away from your mother, blah, 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 blah. But they're all speaking through the spirit of the goddess. Yeah. Right? When men nurture each other, they're doing so with the power of the muse and goddess. And it's not to say men are inferior, right? It's just how it works. It's like, if my brain is working my arms and legs, I'm not saying my arms and legs are inferior. The brain is nothing without the arms and legs, right? I mean, without the rest of the function. It's harmony. And some, there's a captain of the ship, and that's fine. And there's a navigator that tells the captain where to go. Is the navigator superior to the captain? No, right? They're all different. It takes everything together to make the ship run. And that's okay. And so Nestor also is taken and led by Athena, right? The implication here is that Nestor has old age. He did get home safely. He does have all this, all these sons and daughters and all this wealth and prosperity and wonderfulness because he's so pious, right? In the text, the minute Athena, who's been standing next to Telemachus in the form of Mentor, Mentor then tells Nestor, okay, you got to do this and make sure you do all the things right. And Nestor's like, okay. And Mentor's like, okay. And then he turns into a hawk and flies off. And they're like, oh, gee, That was not Mentor. That must have been a god. And of all the gods, it must have been Athena.
Right.
It must have been Athena. And immediately Nestor is like, number one son, go figure out, we're going to give our best calf to Athena in a sacrifice tomorrow morning, bright and early, when the timing is right. Like, he immediately does that. And the implication is he's Nestor. He's like, he's not on this. I mean, he's pious. He does everything right. He honors the muse and honors the goddess. So even leaving the mother realm is good and healthy and led by the inner feminine. One thing I want to do here, if everyone will just indulge me, for the Iliad, Mitchell did an Iliad as well, and I recommend Mitchell's Iliad as well, is I realized when I was reading some passages, and you told me you were going to select the story, Gary, that Athena herself, her relationship with Odysseus certainly, but the snippets we get of her relationship with Telemachus, when I was reading, I was getting a little emotional, right? In terms of how specific and direct, even down to the details, it for me outlines and describes the relationship of the muse to her mortal kind of, one she's decided to be the patron of.
Yeah.
As per my own experience, right, in my own life with my own muse. And there's just like 3 passages I want to read where basically, so the first is when she shows up as Mentor, as the old guy.
Yeah.
And he goes in and he basically lectures Telemachus and says, and one of the things he says is, look, it is no longer fitting for you to act like a child since you are a man now. So Athena, in the guise of this guy, basically goes in and tells him it's time for initiation. You are at the cusp. You are no longer a caterpillar. You are to be a butterfly, and there's only one path through.
Yeah.
Right. So just like get over it, right? Gear up and let's go. And then when she leaves, then in an instant, Athena disappeared, flying up through the air like a bird. And she filled his heart with strength and courage, and brought his father to mind more vividly than ever. He, Telemachus, felt the change and was wonderstruck. He knew that a god had been with him. At once he rejoined the suitors, godlike himself. He's like filled with spirit, entheos, filled with spirit, and rejoins the suitors. And then he says, I'm going to take this ship, etc., etc. That part where you say, he goes out and sort of prays to Athena, because the suitors laugh at him.
Yeah. So
he goes out and he's like, how am I going to do this? Right. And this is something we talk about when we talk about the muse in Bliss and live group advising all the time. You don't just have to take inspiration from the muse and go figure it out on your own. When you hit a roadblock, you can go back to the muse and say, I have no freaking clue what to do next. I'm sorry, I'm such a dunderhead, but assuming you're still on my team and you want me to be the one carrying the ball into the goal, will you just help me? Like, it could be like, I can't even find my car keys. I'm that much of an idiot. Help me. And you like throw yourself on her mercy, right?
Yeah.
So this is after the suitors have like ridiculed him for even the thought, the gall of even thinking that he would take a ship to go look for his father.
Yeah.
He washed his hands in the surf and prayed to Athena. And he doesn't actually know it's Athena yet. So he says, hear me, whoever you are who came to our house yesterday morning. The god who urged me to sail over the misty sea to look for my father, who has been gone for so long. I want to obey you, but my voyage is being delayed by the leading men here, and more than the rest by those contemptible suitors. And so he's a teen. He's like 19. So he's basically like, I don't know, what do I do? And it's like, as a parent, you're like, what do you mean? It's like, what do you mean? How do you get a job? Just put together your resume and then send it out and see what happens. And they're like, how do I put a resume together? And I was like, what do you mean? It's like, how can you be so stupid, right? Just do it. But he doesn't know any better. He doesn't even know to like not ask.
Yeah.
So in his dumb sort of teenage youth, he just asks the god. I mean, it could have been the devil for all he knew, right? Yeah. And what happens after that is Athena comes down, takes the form of Mentor, who is basically his uncle, his friend of Odysseus. When we say mentor, like I'm looking for a mentor or I'm this person's mentor, the Odyssey is where the word mentor came from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And mentor is Athena
Yeah.
in the form of mentor. It's actually, when you have a mentor, it's the goddess or muse guiding you through that mentor. This was his prayer, and Athena was quick to answer. She came down to meet him. This god comes down to the beach to stand with him, for crying out loud, right?
Yeah.
Taking the form of mentor, her body and voice exactly like his, and she said, Telemachus, you won't be a coward or a fool if you are made of the stuff your father was made of, for he kept his word and never left things undone. I know that this journey of yours is going to happen, blah, blah, blah. She gives this prophecy of everything that's going to happen. And she says, this goddess in the form of mentor, you go back and get the provisions ready. I will go into town and I will get you the ship. And she goes and gets the ship, fits it out with the 20 men, et cetera, et cetera. And she's the one that pilots him through. So literally here, it's not the muse putting ideas in your head and saying, oh, you can do it, don't worry. The muse will actually come down and do stuff for you.
Yeah.
Right. And if you've ever gotten like a check in the mail that you didn't expect, or, you know, help, or like a chance encounter or whatever, that is Athena in the form of mentor saying, no, 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 you said, okay. Like even with this, it's like, no, you said, okay, you would do these live sacred space sessions. And I'm like, but she's like, no, you just go take care of the next topic and I will take care of all this other stuff. Stop whining, by the way. Right. And so, and she goes and takes care of it, and they go and they make the journey.
Yeah.
And the final thing I wanted to read here was when they're at Nestor's place. Mm-hmm. You know, Telemachus is telling Nestor, and he's a teenager, right? So he's whining, and even though Athena is clearly helping him, he's still whining, oh, nobody ever helps me or whatever. And that's exactly how we are with the muse as well. Right? The muse has done all this stuff for you and you're still whining. And the muse like doesn't leave you. She's like, all right, here we go again. Right? I need to always deal with you humans being like whiny. And he has just told Nestor about the suitors eating up all the provisions and everything. And he says, and Nestor was with Odysseus at Troy. And Athena was all over the Iliad and Trojan War, helping Odysseus figure everything out. I mean, the Trojan horse, the gambit they finally won. Philoctetes, it was Athena who basically told him everything he needed to do.
Yeah.
And so when Nestor says something, it is the voice of like the good, pious, traditional Greek perspective. He's done everything right.
Yeah.
Right? He hasn't tried to outsmart like Odysseus. He hasn't gone to the extreme of hubris like Achilles. He's just the straight and narrow, 2.5 kids, white picket fence. He's just done everything right and been justly rewarded for it.
Yeah.
And he says, I can't believe these suitors are doing this. Someday I hope Odysseus comes back and takes vengeance. And then he says, I only wish that Athena loved you the way she cared for Odysseus at Troy, where we suffered such miseries. Never before have I seen this so openly, basically like shamelessly, right? Show love to a mortal as she showed to your father, standing right at his side. And he says, if she loved you in that way, those fine fellows would all this stuff would end and they would stop misbehaving. So in the middle of this witness of Athena basically completely unfairly putting her thumb on the scales of life in favor of you, right? It's a beautiful witness. And then what Telemachus says, Telemachus, who is already on the other side of his sea journey, Mentor already helped him. He's already reached Nestor. He's received like royalty by Nestor. What does the 19-year-old say? He says, "My lord, I don't think that this will ever happen. It's too much to hope for. Not even if the gods willed it, could it come true. Even if Athena were helping me, it wouldn't. It's just too, it will never be better. It will never be better. Woe is me." And then the text says, Athena's standing next to him in the form of mentor. Okay, so she is literally standing next to him in the form of mentor as he's like whining and complaining. And the text says, not mentor answered, but Athena answered. "How can you say such a thing, Telemachus? If an immortal chooses to do it, he can easily bring back men from the ends of the earth. As for myself, I would rather suffer great hardships and finally come home safe." Blah, 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 blah. I mean, so he's like, "Oh, it never works. Nothing will ever be better," with Athena standing right next to him.
Right next to him,
And she just starts rolling her eyes, going like, "How can you say that, Telemachus?" And she can't say she's Athena.
Right.
And then she's like, okay, you know what? I gotta go, people. So she tells Telemachus what to do. She tells Nestor what to do. Nestor's like, "Okay, got it." And then she turns into a hawk and flies away. And they're like, "Oh my gosh." And at that point, even Telemachus is like, "Oh my gosh, have I really put my foot in my mouth this time?" But then the next time he continues whining. And that says something about male initiation as guided by the muse, but it also says something very tender about the relationship of the muse to you. And I totally resonate with this too. It's like Athena comes down, stands with you on the shore. And unfairly helps you through all this stuff. And then at the very next crossroads and barrier and blockage, obstacle, you crumple again and say, "Nobody ever helps me. I'm just a victim. I have a shitty lot in life." And the muse is still standing next to you going like, "Are you freaking serious? Come on. Are we doing this or not?" And that's a little bit of flavor of like what it's like to be with the muse. And we all do this. I do this all the time. Okay, so a couple more things I just want to say about male initiation, which is, like you said, he goes into the company of men, Menelaus and Nestor. And the key thing they do, because it's sort of like he sails out, he doesn't really get any news, and then he sails back. And then Odysseus is there. What has actually happened? What has actually happened across the water? And it's the scene you described where Menelaus tells the story of what he knows, and then tells the story of his brother Agamemnon being like cut down with treachery. So he starts crying. Nestor starts crying about his son that was killed in the war. Helen starts crying about all the stuff she's lost. And then Telemachus starts crying about his father and the suitors. And they're all crying together. In other words, and we've talked about this in past sessions around grief and the power of grief and ancestors, honoring the dead and the golden thread, all those sessions we talked about this. They are grieving. They are grieving. And in Greek society, full grieving was the province and jurisdiction of the men. And just to remind, for those of you who don't remember, grieving is important in Greek society because if you don't grieve an ancestor fully, they will not reach the other shore and transform into an ancestor. They'll just become this empty shade ghost flitting around. So in a funeral, when people say, "Oh, shh, don't cry," that's a disaster. That's an absolute disaster. Right? You need to be like ideally tearing your clothes, banging the floor. And that's the emotion that sends your kinsman to the other side to be transformed into their own form of butterfly, which is an ancestor, which then comes back and helps you with wisdom, with protection, and also identity. You don't know who you are if you don't know your ancestors. And accept them and honor them. And so the minute he grieves, the next morning he comes back, and Odysseus is there. Odysseus. That's what he's done. That's what he's done. The last thing I'll say here is that this is a clockwork. The more you study the clockwork of something like the Odyssey, the more you will understand the dynamics of masculine and feminine reintegration. Part of the reason I haven't done the Odyssey as as a mythic healing thing is because it's just so large, right? So I think, as we discussed, the only way we're going to do it is through these live sacred sessions, perhaps, and just do it little sort of bite by bite. But what happens if you look at the chronology is that Athena gets the okay from Zeus at the beginning of the Odyssey to release Odysseus from Calypso and also simultaneously initiate Telemachus.
Yeah.
And the journey Odysseus is on is not from boy to man, is from man to king, which we won't talk about today.
Yeah.
But just as Telemachus leaves Penelope to do his own mini Odyssey, at exactly the same point in the story, Odysseus is released from the realm of the feminine also. He is released from the island of Calypso. So Calypso and Penelope have a parallel thing here.
Right.
Calypso is his wife, but he's basically like this matronly sort of motherish wife figure to him. Right? She does everything for him, takes care, offers to make him an immortal if he'll only stay, and he still says no. Which is basically the lure of a mother.
Yeah.
Right. If you stay in my realm, you'll never have to grow up.
Yeah.
You can always be a boy. You can always be a mama's boy.
Yeah.
And those men, even into their 50s, they can't pull it together, right? Because they're still in the realm of the mother. They have been uninitiated. And so they leave at the same time. And long story short, when he comes back, Odysseus has come back as well. It's like this short and long. It's basically like this perfectly synchronized clockwork, the entirety of the Odyssey. So there's something there in the parallel from boy to man and man to king that we won't get into here. But basically, the idea here is that there is this dual recovery, and these aspects of initiation, leaving the realm of the mother, not that the realm of the mother is bad, but it's part of a larger vision that you have to leave the realm of the mother, go into the realm of men. And the key thing, if nothing else, you learn from men is how to grieve. And in our patriarchy, when we've lost the sacred, we've also lost the power of grieving. Men are afraid to cry at funerals. They're supposed to be tough, which is a total childish adolescent view of manhood. Right? And so he learns to grieve. He is initiated. He comes back. And the minute he comes back, he gets access to his full manpower and king power in the form of his father. Because Telemachus and Odysseus are just two aspects of the same inner masculine within you. When your masculine leaves the realm of the mother, learns to grieve, full access and return of the king happens. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then, if you want to know what man to king looks like, then you follow the path of Odysseus. But it's synchronous. It's synchronous. It's like this team lift of the inner masculine from one realm to the next.
It's kind of telling, I think, when you say it that way, because the symptoms of what Telemachus is doing and what Odysseus is doing in the same timeline before they set off on this journey of initiation is the same thing. While Telemachus is simply desperately watching helplessly the house going into ruins, Odysseus is kind of pining away, homesick and helpless, and thinking that he has no escape. There is no way anything is going to change in his life. So it's that suspended state that they both find themselves in is kind of very telling of.
Well, I mean, Odysseus is on the island of Calypso, this beautiful goddess. He sleeps in her bed every night, endless feasts every day, and she offers to make him an immortal if he will decide to stay and be her husband. And he still doesn't. And the reason why is because that's all the logos. It's like all the pleasures, but the mythos is not fulfilled. The mythos is only fulfilled when he's back with Penelope. So he's sitting there eating his own heart out, like wasting his days. Even though any man with that offer would be like, why wouldn't I do that? Why wouldn't you want that, right? Yeah. And Odysseus is the example of like, you can have that and enjoy it for a while, but there is always this higher purpose that, you don't attain the immortality of an Odysseus until you fulfill your mythos. right?
It's the
Philoctetes
same.
answered to it. Everybody answers to it. Achilles answers to it. Everyone answers to the mythos eventually.
So I find this motif very intriguing in terms of the inner masculine aspect as well, because the suitors are also a part of the inner masculine. And the suitors have been just eating Odysseus out of his house and home. And they don't leave either. I mean, they're the same way. I mean, I'm getting all the pleasures, and I'm getting wine and food and merriment and everything here. So why would I leave? So
Well, that's the thing. That's the wounded inner masculine. If they were on the island of Calypso, they are creating their own island of Calypso.
Exactly.
By force,
right?
by profane force, and by fear, threat, and control.
Yeah.
Right. So they would take that part of your inner masculine would take it in a second. Right. Yeah. But that's not the right answer, because you just look at the parallel is the suitors, and it feels awful.
Yeah.
It feels awful.
Yeah. So there's the lovely motifs just repeating themselves from different angles, in the form of Telemachus, in the form of Odysseus, in the form of suitors, all of them in kind of the same situation, until there is that one action that triggers everything. And, in the way the Odyssey is narrated, it's like the action is really like Telemachus leaving on that journey.
Right.
It's not even Odysseus was initiating the first action. The first action seems to be that of Telemachus. And then the whole story just thrusts forward from that state. So
right, actually at the beginning, it's Athena up in Olympus.
Yeah. So she's talking
to Zeus, and she's basically like, look, we got to get this moving. Why have you abandoned Odysseus? How could you do that? And Zeus is the one who's like, no, fair daughter. Like, this was the plan all along. How could you say that about me? If you're saying you're the timekeeper, right? So if you're saying it's time, then let's do it. I'm not with. I'm just waiting for the signal from you. So even Zeus is waiting for Athena's like starting gun to nod and say, go forward. And then she's like, got it, great. I got my note of approval, right? And she goes down, and Hermes goes down, and all the action sets forward. So Athena is the key here in everything.
And in fact, even her so-called anger, where she kind of lets Odysseus get stranded and shipwrecked, and he goes through his ordeal for 10 years. Even the anger, so-called, is in a way her vision of that transformation, right? That he needs to go through that in order to kind of fulfill his transformation from man to king. So it's couched in those terms, but it really is part of the grand plan, it seems like.
I mean, what happened on Troy after the city was sacked is that as they were sacking the city, they also, in the city of Troy, there was also a temple to Athena.
Athena, yeah.
And I think what happened, I forgot who did it, but someone went in and there was a statue that was precious to her. It was Ajax. They carried the statue out and smashed it.
Yeah.
And Athena, who helped the Greeks win, was like, okay, time out.
Yeah.
That's not okay. Yeah. And, okay, you went a little overboard, and I can punish you, or you can give me rich sacrifices to make up for it. And they didn't do the sacrifices. They got into this fight, and then they left. And that's why the Nostoi, which was all the ones who were trying to get home after the Trojan War, some of them did better than others, but like Nestor is a fine example of this. The ones who sacrificed to Athena and apologized got home okay, basically. And so if you take Athena as like the power of the muse, it's like, you can mess up, but you can lose sight of the muse, but you do need to come back to it. That is the mythos. It is her hand and her blueprint that you're following. Yeah. And if you lose sight of that, or even further, if you say, bring it, come at me, right? I don't follow anybody's like pattern. Then it's like, that's just, just counting the minutes for the thunderbolt to come and get you, right?
Yeah.
It's hubris. Anything else?
Right. I think that's for today. If there are questions here on Facebook, of course, I'll add them up as a follow-up thing for our question and answer session.
Okay, awesome.
and then we can, talk about that. I'm sure we're going to talk about the Odyssey a little more from different perspectives even later on. So we'll just gather all the questions together and address them in the Q&A.
Okay, great. All right, and then let's just, before I close the session, let's just say our exercise for this week is to reflect on your own, inner masculine, right? And like, just to ask yourself, in this whole sort of Telemachus, Odysseus kind of thing, where is he now? Where is my own inner masculine right now? How is my own inner masculine doing? Is my own inner masculine actually initiated yet? If not, how would we go about doing that within our own selves? Who is my mentor? Who is my Nestor? Where is my Odysseus, et cetera, et cetera. Regardless of your gender, you can ask these questions of yourself. If you have questions, post them. Gary will collect them, and we'll do a Q&A session at some point. But then also, in addition to that, asking where is my inner masculine at this point, the natural sort of corollary question is, where is my Athena? And does she have a message for me? Right? Do I feel like I'm following her guidance, or am I not following her guidance? Or am I following her guidance and whining and kicking and screaming all along the way? Guilty as charged. That's me. So that's what I think would be a fun exercise to do this week between now and the next session. All right. Okay, so we're at hour 2. Sorry about that. But I hope you felt it was interesting and worthwhile. And now I'll just go ahead and close the session. So our next session is next Sunday, same time. It's free. It's open to everyone. Please invite others. And go ahead and ask your questions, and we'll do a Q&A session at some point. You can sign up for the next session with your green button link right there. And we'll go ahead and close the session now. So I hereby close this session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and Gary. And thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, the spiritual nourishment of this shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, free of shame, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you. Thank you.